Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be discussing if the Panasonic GX8 is still a good option for videography and photography in 2019. I'm going to be listing the pros and cons of this camera. The first reason why I think the Panasonic GX8 is still a good camera in 2019 is because of its 20 megapixel MFT sensor. MFT stands for micro four thirds, and that means it's a 2 times crop from a full frame sensor, so you're having half the area from a full frame sensor. Now, in the past and before 2015, which is when this camera was released, practically all micro four thirds cameras had a 16 megapixel sensor, and this one is a 20 megapixel one. Now, after 2015, most of the new release cameras are coming with a 20 megapixel sensor, which means this camera is still up to date with its sensor. Now, you may think that because of its 20 megapixel sensor, and because of the increased resolution, it's gonna be having worse low light performance over 16 megapixel micro four thirds sensor, which is not the case. The low light performance is practically the same to 16 megapixel cameras. Another reason why I recommend this camera is because of its image stabilizer, which stabilizes the sensor and can work in conjunction with the stabilizer in the lens, so you'll get dual image stabilization, which provides extremely great capabilities for handheld shooting. I've been able to shoot photos at half of a second, which is an extremely long shutter speed, and most cameras will get you shaky photos at that shutter speed. There's a downside to the image stabilizer though, which is that it doesn't work when shooting video, which is kind of a bummer because there's really no reason why they would do that. And yeah, you will still be able to use the lens stabilizer, but you can't use dual image stabilization, which works great and would have been really handy for video. Next reason is that the Panasonic GX8 shoots great 4K video. The video is really clear, as you can see in these samples, and it provides a lot of shooting options. You have a CNV picture profile, which is a really flat profile with increased dynamic range, which is really good if you want to grade it afterwards. Also for video, they have included an articulating EVF, which I think is really handy and makes shooting video more comfortable. Also, the EVF is a 2.36 million dot EVF, which is kind of a standard resolution now. The image is clear, and I think it's one of the best EVFs I've ever used because of its 0.73 magnification, which is better than most DSLRs. Another thing is that the Panasonic GX8 has 4 dials. There is a front dial and a back dial, an exposure comp dial and a mode dial, which means that you're going to be able to change settings really quickly. There are also a lot of custom buttons. For example, this function button, I choose this to turn on and off silent mode, which is another great feature. Silent mode means that there is no shutter sound. It's just going to be shooting silently and you won't hear anything. And I think that is great for shooting in museums and when you don't want to disturb other people. Downsides about an electronic viewfinder is that you get increased rolling shutter, which means that when you turn the camera, you'll get bent lines, which you can see in the sample. Another thing which makes the Panasonic GX8 really stand out from other cameras is its weather sealing. That means that you can shoot the camera in rain and it won't be damaged as fast as other cameras. For example, the newer Panasonic GX9 doesn't have that feature. The Panasonic GX8 also features the depth from defocus autofocus, which is Panasonic's standard autofocus, which they use in their highest line of cameras, the Panasonic G9. And it works really good for stills. It's really one of the fastest autofocuses I've ever tested. In video though, it's usable but not comparable to, for example, Canon's dual pixel autofocus, which is way better for video. Another downside of the GX8 and every micro four thirds and APS-C camera is their sensor. It's just smaller than a full frame sensor, which means that you'll have less light on it, which means that you'll have worse low light performance. You won't get the same amount of bokeh or background blur, because you'll have to multiply the aperture of the lens times 2, which means, for example, this 14 to 42 kit lens has an aperture of 3.5 at its wide end, and if you multiply that by 2, you'll get a f7 on a full frame camera, which is really not a lot of bokeh. Even the lens with the best aperture from Panasonic, that's for example a f1.2 lens, will only be an f2.4 for full frame. Another plus side is its form factor. Panasonic GX8 is a mirrorless camera. Mirrorless cameras are quite small in comparison to a DSLR, which makes it way easier to travel with them. The Panasonic GX8 also features an audio jack. It is a 2.5mm audio jack, which I think is really annoying. I think there is really no reason for them to do that. There would have been enough space for a 3.5mm audio jack. That means you'll have to adapt pretty much every mic, and those adapters are mostly not very well made and they fall apart, as you can see. Another downside is that there are no slow-mo recording options on the Panasonic GX8. Its highest frame rate is 60 frames per second in 1080p. It doesn't have 120 frames, which the newer Panasonic cameras feature. The Panasonic GX8 also features 4K photo modes, which is a really useful feature. It allows you to capture images with 30 frames per second burst, even with a pre-burst. That means that it'll always take pictures, and when you hit the shutter button, it will take the pictures from 1 second before you hit the shutter button and from 1 second after you hit the shutter button. You can photograph a bird when it's taking off. These 4K photo modes only allow you to capture 8 megapixel JPEG images, no RAW files. That's fine though, the resolution on these is fine, and it'll also crop in to the sensor, so you will get an additional crop, which can be handy if you're shooting with a telephoto lens and you want to increase your range, but it's really annoying if you want to just shoot normal stuff. That crop also exists when you shoot 4K video. Next downside is the low light capabilities, which isn't great with every Micro Four Thirds camera. You can use it, in my opinion, up to ISO 3200. After that, everything is too grainy. The Panasonic GX8 is one of the few cameras from Panasonic to feature a fully articulating screen, which means you'll be able to take selfies and shoot from high up or down low, which is also really handy for video. One last reason to buy a Micro Four Thirds camera is that there are a lot of lenses available from both Olympus and Panasonic. You can get used lenses for a fairly cheap price. New lenses are quite expensive if you compare them to full frame or APS-C lenses, which is quite sad, I think, because they're way smaller than their full frame or APS-C counterparts, and also their aperture isn't as wide as the other lenses. I think the reason for that is that they have to make them way more sharp than the lenses for the cameras with the bigger sensors, which I think increases the production costs. Lenses I have here are the Panasonic 45-200 Mark I. There's also a second version of this. It features Mega OIS image stabilization, which works in conjunction with the camera's image stabilizer, and I wouldn't really recommend this lens because it's really unsharp, and at its 200mm end, it's equivalent to a 90-400mm on a full frame camera. The Olympus 45mm f1.8, which is equivalent to a 90mm f3.6 on a full frame camera. I use this lens to shoot portraits. I think the bokeh from this lens is still great, even if it's an f3.6 on a full frame. One downside with this lens is when it's wide open, it's really unsharp. And the last lens is the Panasonic 14-42, which is a kit lens which came with the camera. It's actually surprisingly sharp for its price. It's also an f3.5 to f5.6, which means that it's in full frame terms an f7 to f12, so not very fast. I think it's a good all-around lens, and it's also really amazingly stabilized, and it also works in conjunction with the in-body image stabilization. Alright, so why should you get the Panasonic GX8 instead of its close competitors from Panasonic, which are the Panasonic GX9, the Panasonic G81, and G91? Well, the GX9 is its younger sibling. It has a very similar sensor and is in general a smaller camera, which means it also has a smaller grip and smaller dials. Its upgrades are a higher res EVF and better image stabilization. It's also more expensive than a used Panasonic GX8, and you can't really get it used because it's so new. It doesn't feature mic jack and no weather sealing. There's also the G81 from Panasonic, which goes for around the same price on eBay, which is around $500 for the body only. It features a 60 megapixel sensor, which is a lower megapixel count than the Panasonic GX8. It's also more video oriented, and it has a bigger, more comfortable body and bigger grip. It features better image stabilization and it's also a little bit newer. The G91, which can be had for around $1,000 with the kit lens, is more expensive, and the only difference to the G81 is that it features a mic check and a headphone check. It also features a 20 megapixel sensor, which the G81 doesn't. It has a 16 megapixel sensor. Both of those cameras are weather sealed. Why I think you should get the GX8 instead of the GX9 is because the GX8 was more of a professional camera when it was released compared to the GX9, which is more of a consumer camera because of its smaller body and the lack of weather sealing and a mic check. So I think you should get the cheaper Panasonic GX8 and you'll be happier with it because it's just a more versatile and user-friendly body. Hope you liked that review. If you did, please subscribe and like. See you next time.